"If you marry me, I can stop the war, human," said the alien queen. For years, the war between the humans and the Xthar had raged across countless star systems. Two powerful forces clashed, both fighting for control, both unwilling to back down. The human colonies, once peaceful and thriving, were now nothing more than embattled worlds, struggling to survive against the might of the Xthar. The Xthar Empire, with its superior technology and fierce warriors, seemed unstoppable, but the humans had fought back with an unexpected ferocity of their own. No one could predict when, or if, the war would end. Captain Jackson Renner sat in the command center of the human fleet, staring at the massive holographic display before him. It showed the warfront, shattered planets, fleets engaged in endless dogfights, and the devastating effects of a conflict that seemed never-ending. Jackson, a seasoned diplomat, had spent much of his career attempting to resolve disputes between factions, but this war was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was personal, for both sides. His communications officer interrupted his thoughts, the voice crackling through the intercom. "Captain Renner, we've received orders from command. You're to lead a diplomatic mission. They've chosen you to negotiate a peace treaty with the Xthar Queen." Jackson blinked, momentarily stunned. "The Queen? You mean Queen Vienna?" "Yes, sir. The orders are clear. You leave for her flagship in 3 hours." Jackson frowned. He had heard of Queen Vienna, the ruthless, powerful ruler of the Xthar. Her name was feared across the galaxy. It was said that her eyes alone could reduce enemies to cowering wrecks. The war had escalated under her rule, and the humans had paid a heavy price. The thought of sitting down to negotiate with someone like her felt impossible. "Understood," Jackson replied, though his heart raced. This mission was unlike any he had taken before. A simple mistake could result in more death, more destruction, but it was the only hope left. The next few hours were a blur of preparations. Jackson's mind kept drifting back to the words of the communications officer, the Xthar Queen. To him, Queen Vienna was more myth than reality, an enigma that had remained a shadow in every diplomat's worst nightmares. The journey to the Xthar flagship was brief, but the tension was unbearable. Jackson stood on the observation deck of his ship, staring out at the void, wondering what lay ahead. A meeting with an alien queen, the leader of one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. A woman who had never been known for mercy. What could she possibly want with a human diplomat? He didn't have long to contemplate before the call came. "We're approaching the flagship, Captain." Jackson felt his stomach tighten. He had faced countless tense moments in his career, but this was different. This could be the moment that decided the fate of millions. The moment the door to the throne room slid open, Jackson's breath caught in his throat. Queen Vienna stood before him, surrounded by her royal guard. She was tall, imposing, and her presence seemed to fill the room like a storm. Her dark, multicolored skin shimmered in the low light, and her long, flowing hair cascaded down her back like liquid obsidian. Her eyes were like twin pools of molten gold, fierce and unblinking. "Captain Renner," she said, her voice smooth and authoritative, "you've come." Jackson had prepared for this, or at least he thought he had. He had read the reports, learned the customs, and practiced his diplomatic speech. But none of it mattered in the face of the Queen's gaze. It felt as though she could peer straight into his soul, dissecting him, reading every thought. For a moment, he was speechless. Finally, he found his voice. "Your Majesty," he said with a bow, "I've come in hopes of negotiating peace between our people." Vienna's expression remained unreadable, but her golden eyes glimmered with something that Jackson couldn't place, curiosity, perhaps, or something more dangerous. "Peace," she mused. "What makes you think your people are worthy of peace? You have fought against us for years, killed our soldiers, destroyed our worlds. Why should I believe you now?" Jackson took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "I believe that both sides have lost too much already. The war can't continue. We must find a way to end it before it destroys both our civilizations." For a long moment, Vienna said nothing. She only watched him, her gaze unwavering. The silence was oppressive, the weight of her scrutiny nearly unbearable. Then with a small, almost imperceptible smile, she spoke. "Very well, Captain Renner, you have my attention." They spent the next few hours discussing the terms of peace. Jackson spoke of ceasefires, trade agreements, and the shared suffering both species had endured. He could see that Vienna was listening, her mind working through the complexities of his proposals. But there was something else in her eyes, something deeper, something Jackson couldn't quite understand. At last, after what felt like an eternity, Vienna leaned forward in her throne. "There is another way to end the war, Captain." Jackson's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Vienna's smile widened, though it was anything but kind. "If you marry me, I can stop the war." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Jackson's mind froze for a moment. He thought he had misheard her. "You want me to marry you?" he asked, his voice sounding almost incredulous. Vienna's eyes narrowed and her tone became deadly serious. "Yes, my people are on the brink of collapse. There are factions within my empire that seek to destroy me. A marriage to you, someone of great importance to your people, would unite our factions. It would solidify peace, not just on a diplomatic level, but on a personal one. A union between our species, forged in strength and necessity." Jackson stood frozen in place, stunned by the gravity of her words. The idea was absurd. A marriage to an alien queen? The very thought was beyond comprehension. But then again, so was the war, and if this was the only way to end it. "Your Majesty," Jackson began, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts raging in his mind. "This is not a decision I can make lightly. I am a representative of my people, and this proposal—" "I know exactly what it means," Vienna interrupted, her voice softening just a fraction. "But I am not asking you to make this decision for the galaxy. I am asking you to make it for your people, for your homeworld, for the future." Jackson's mind spun. The war had taken so much from him. His comrades, his friends, his family. It had all been lost in the name of diplomacy and power. Could he really make this sacrifice? Could he truly marry an alien queen to end the conflict that had torn his world apart? The weight of the decision pressed down on him like an anchor, but deep inside, he knew what he had to do. The war had to end. If this was the only way, then so be it. "I will consider your proposal, Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "But I cannot promise anything yet. This is beyond anything I've ever imagined." Vienna regarded him for a long moment as if weighing his words. Then slowly she nodded. "I expect no less, but know this, the fate of your people, of your world, may depend on your choice. Choose wisely, Captain Renner." And with that, the fate of the galaxy was sealed. Jackson left the throne room with more questions than answers, his mind reeling from the alien queen's unexpected proposition. As he returned to his ship, the weight of the galaxy seemed to settle on his shoulders. The war was far from over, and his next decision would determine the course of history for both humans and Xthar alike. Jackson Renner sat alone in his quarters, his hands gripping the edge of the table, as the hum of the ship echoed in the background. The words of Queen Vienna repeated in his mind like an endless loop. "If you marry me, I can stop the war." He couldn't escape them, no matter how hard he tried. The absurdity of the offer lingered like a weight on his chest, but as much as he wanted to dismiss it, a part of him knew it was more than just a bizarre power play. Queen Vienna wasn't like the leaders he had met in his career. Her authority wasn't just political. It radiated from her very being, a cold, imperious energy that demanded attention. And the way she had spoken to him, with that strange mix of confidence and vulnerability, made him wonder if there was more to her than the ruthless warlord he had heard about. He rose from his seat and walked to the window, staring out at the vastness of space. The stars were distant, their light so ancient it seemed almost irrelevant in the face of the present conflict. Yet they remained, unchanged, untouched by the war that had consumed everything below, a war that had cost millions of lives on both sides. And now Queen Vienna was offering peace, at a price. Could it be that simple? Could marriage truly bring an end to the conflict that had torn entire civilizations apart? Jackson had seen firsthand the devastation that the war had caused. Planets reduced to rubble, entire fleets of ships lost in the blink of an eye, families torn apart by the violence. But even in the face of all that destruction, the idea of marrying the enemy, an alien queen, felt impossible. Yet the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The Xthar Empire was vast, and their military strength seemed limitless. Every peace negotiation had failed because there was always someone in the empire who opposed it, someone who stood to lose power. But a marriage between the two most powerful figures in the galaxy could change everything. It could unite factions that had been fighting for generations, give hope to those who had lost it, and perhaps, just perhaps, end the war. Jackson sighed and rubbed his temples. He had spent years studying diplomacy, understanding the delicate balance of power between species, and yet he had never been prepared for something like this. He needed time. Time to think, time to weigh his options, time to understand what this truly meant. The ship's communication system beeped, pulling him from his thoughts. He walked over to the console, his fingers hesitating above the controls. It was a secure message from command. "Captain Renner," the voice on the other end said, "we've been briefed on the situation. We understand the Queen's offer, but we need you to remember your duty. You are a representative of humanity. You must think carefully before making any decisions. The future of our people may depend on your next move." Jackson felt the weight of the words settle heavily on his shoulders. The pressure was mounting. Everyone was watching him, waiting for him to make the call. But how could he decide? Could a single man's decision really end a war that had been raging for so long? Could he really end it? He thought of the people, his family, his friends, the humans who had given everything in the fight for survival. But he also thought of the Exthar, Queen Vienna's people. She had made it clear that her empire was falling apart. There were factions within her court that wanted her dethroned, and there were others who were too blinded by hatred to see that the war was leading them to ruin. If he married her, it might save her empire and it might save his own people. But could he truly live with the cost? Jackson spent the next few hours pacing the room, his thoughts spinning out of control. He knew he couldn't make this decision alone. He needed advice. He needed someone to help him see things from a different perspective. But who? He was far from home, and everyone he trusted was light years away. Then the door to his quarters slid open. Lieutenant Maya Cortez, his trusted second-in-command, stepped inside. She looked at him with concern, but there was also something else in her eyes, something that told him she knew exactly what was going on in his mind. "Captain," she said softly, "I know what you're thinking." Jackson stopped pacing and turned to face her. "Do you?" Maya nodded. "You're considering the Queen's offer. You're thinking about what it could mean for the war, for humanity, and you're worried about what it means for you personally. But you're not alone in this, sir. You never have been." He sighed and rubbed his face. "I don't know what to do, Maya. I've never faced anything like this. A marriage to the enemy." "I know it's hard to grasp," Maya said, taking a step forward. "But think about it. If this marriage could stop the war, what's the cost? I mean, really think about it. You're not giving up your humanity, not your soul. It's a political alliance, nothing more. You'll still be you." Jackson looked at her, his eyes searching. "And if it's more than that, what if she's using me for something else? What if this is some sort of trap?" "Then we'll deal with it, Captain," Maya said firmly. "We've dealt with worse before, but I don't think it's a trap. I think she's desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. This might be her last chance to save her empire." Jackson fell silent, considering her words. He trusted Maya more than anyone, and her insight had often been the key to solving tough situations. But this was beyond anything either of them had faced before. "I never thought peace would come at such a price," Jackson said softly, more to himself than to Maya. Maya smiled faintly. "Neither did I, but if this is the way to end the war, it might be worth it. You've always taught me that diplomacy isn't about finding easy answers, it's about finding the right one." Jackson nodded slowly, his mind beginning to clear. He had always known that diplomacy was messy, that peace often came at a cost. But this was a sacrifice on a scale he couldn't have imagined. "I'll meet with her again," he said finally. "I'll hear her out. I can't make any promises, but I'll give her the chance to explain." Maya nodded, her expression resolute. "I'll be with you, Captain, every step of the way." The next morning, Jackson made his way to the Exthar flagship. The air seemed thicker now, more charged with expectation. The decision he was about to make could change everything. Peace, war. The lives of billions of people rested on his shoulders, and yet he felt as though he was about to face the unknown. Queen Vienna was waiting for him in the throne room, her presence as imposing as ever. The moment he entered, she fixed her gaze on him as though she had been waiting for this moment all along. "I knew you would come," she said softly, her voice almost a purr. "You know what you have to do." Jackson stood tall, his mind focused. He couldn't let her intimidate him, not now. This was his decision. And yet, as he looked at her, he couldn't help but wonder, was she truly the enemy, or was she just another victim of a war that neither side could win? "I'm here to listen," Jackson said, his voice steady. "Explain to me why this marriage is the only way." Vienna's eyes gleamed with something he couldn't quite place. "Because it will unite our people. It will show them that peace is possible, that we can move forward together. We are both leaders, Captain Renner. Together we can reshape the galaxy." Jackson took a deep breath. This was the moment, his moment. And whatever decision he made, there would be no going back. The silence in the room stretched out between them, thick and heavy. Jackson stood before Queen Vienna, feeling the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. Her words lingered in the air as if they were not just an offer but a challenge. "Together, we can reshape the galaxy," she had said. Jackson had heard those words before, from leaders, diplomats, and generals who promised a better future. But all he could think of was the price. What would it cost to unite their two people, to end this war once and for all? "Tell me more," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts inside his head. "Why do you think this marriage will end the war?" Vienna leaned back in her throne, her eyes never leaving him. "Because it will give us the strength to unify, to heal our people. My enemies are not only within my court, Captain Renner. There are factions within the Xthar that believe peace is a betrayal of our warrior ways. If we marry, the war factions will be forced to recognize my power and legitimacy. They'll have no choice but to fall in line, or they will lose everything." Jackson's mind whirred as he considered her words. He had been briefed on the internal politics of the Xthar Empire. Queen Vienna was a strong ruler, but even she was not immune to the power struggles within her own court. If she married a human, someone from the species she had been at war with for years, it would send a clear message to all those who questioned her authority. This was a new era. "But what about the humans?" Jackson asked. "What makes you think they will accept this? A marriage between our people could tear us apart." Vienna's gaze softened just a fraction. "I've already sent word to your government, Captain. I've made my proposal clear. This marriage is not just between you and me, it is between our two civilizations. It symbolizes hope, a future beyond this endless cycle of war. Your people need to see it too, Jackson. They need to believe that peace is possible, that there is something worth fighting for besides destruction." Jackson looked at her, and for a moment he saw something that surprised him: vulnerability. The Queen was powerful, yes, but she was also desperate. She wasn't just a ruler seeking to expand her empire. She was a leader on the edge of losing everything. Her people were broken, divided, and tired of fighting. In a way, they were like his people, lost and searching for a way out. He thought about his own people, the countless families torn apart, the soldiers who had died in battles that seemed endless. He thought about the colonies that had been bombarded, entire cities reduced to ash. Was peace truly worth any price? Could he be the one to make it happen? Jackson's heart raced as he considered the weight of what she was offering. It was more than just a political marriage. It was a chance to end the war, to save millions of lives on both sides. But was it enough? Was the idea of unity worth the sacrifice? The Queen's voice broke through his thoughts. "I know what you are thinking, Jackson. I see the doubt in your eyes, but I have offered you the only thing that can truly bring an end to this conflict. You do not have to love me. You do not even have to like me, but we both know that if we stand together, the war will cease. Our people will stop fighting. The galaxy will change." Jackson shook his head slowly, still struggling to make sense of it all. "And what about the rest of your people? The ones who still want to fight? Will they simply accept this?" Vienna's expression hardened once more, her eyes like twin blades. "They will have no choice. Those who refuse to accept peace will be dealt with. The union between us will be the symbol of the new era. They will either follow or be cast aside." Jackson felt a shiver run down his spine. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. A single misstep could cost everything. If he agreed to this marriage, if he became part of this union, he would be tied to her and to the fate of two galaxies, forever. "I need time," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I can't make this decision without understanding more." Vienna nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving him. "Time, yes, I will give you time. But I warn you, Captain Renner, time is something we no longer have. The war rages on, and every moment we delay costs more lives. The decision must be made soon." With that, she turned away, signaling the end of their meeting. Jackson stood there for a long moment, the silence of the throne room pressing down on him. His mind raced, torn between duty and the unimaginable sacrifice Vienna was asking of him. He left the throne room, his mind clouded with doubts. Maya was waiting for him in the hallway outside, her face etched with concern. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice low. "I don't know," Jackson muttered, rubbing his temples. "She's not lying, Maya. I can see it in her eyes. The war is destroying her people, just like it's destroying ours. She's desperate for peace, and she's willing to do anything to get it, even marry me." Maya's eyes widened. "Marry you? Is she serious?" Jackson nodded slowly. Yes, she is. And the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. She's offering peace, Maya, true peace, but at a price I don't know if I can pay. Maya didn't speak right away. She could see the struggle in Jackson's eyes. He was a man of conviction, someone who had always put duty first. But this was different. This was personal. You don't have to do this, Maya said softly. You don't have to marry her. We can still fight. We've been doing it for years. Jackson shook his head. Fighting hasn't worked, Maya. We've lost too many people. We can't keep going like this. The war will destroy us all. He looked at her, his expression dark. But if I agree to this, if I marry her, I'll be bound to her, bound to the Xthar. There's no going back. Maya placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice firm but gentle. I get it, Captain, I do, but don't let the weight of this decision break you. You've always been the one who thought of the bigger picture. You've always believed in peace. If you think this is the way to get it, then do it. But do it for the right reasons. Not because you think it's the only choice, but because you believe in it. Jackson let out a long breath, his shoulders slumping. He had always prided himself on making the right decision, on being the voice of reason in a world filled with chaos. But this was a decision beyond anything he had ever faced. It wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. It was about his own life, his own future, and the future of countless others. The next few days passed in a blur. Jackson met with his superiors, spoke with the Human Council, and tried to gather as much information as he could. But no one had any clear answers. Some said the marriage was the only way to end the war. Others warned that it was a trap, a dangerous game that could backfire in ways they couldn't predict. But through it all, Jackson couldn't escape the truth that Vienna had spoken. There was no easy way out. The war was tearing their worlds apart, and something had to change. Finally, Jackson made up his mind. He would meet with Vienna again, and this time he would give her an answer. He stood in front of the Queen, the moment of truth finally arriving. Vienna looked at him with the same intense gaze as before, her eyes betraying no emotion. I've made my decision, Jackson said, his voice steady. I will marry you for the peace of our people. Vienna's lips curved into the smallest of smiles, but there was no triumph in her expression, only quiet understanding. You've chosen wisely, Captain Renner. And so, the first step toward a new era began. The war that had ravaged the galaxy for so long was about to come to an end. But the road ahead was uncertain, and the cost of peace was yet to be fully understood. The days that followed Jackson's decision felt like a strange, dreamlike blur. The agreement to marry Queen Vienna had been made, but the consequences of that choice were only beginning to settle in. His life, once defined by his duty as a human diplomat, now felt like it was on the verge of becoming something else entirely. He was no longer just Captain Jackson Renner. He was the human who was about to marry an alien queen. The negotiations between the humans and the Xthar Empire took a sharp turn. The news of their union spread quickly across both human and Xthar worlds, stirring excitement, fear, and outrage in equal measure. Some saw it as a beacon of hope, a chance for peace after years of relentless war. Others viewed it as an unforgivable betrayal, a human leader siding with the enemy, a symbol of weakness. Jackson felt the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders, every glance, every whispered conversation, every report from his superiors. He was under constant pressure, not only to secure the peace, but to prove that his choice wasn't one of desperation, but of hope. It was hard to know who, if anyone, truly believed in the Union, least of all Jackson himself. The Queen had kept her promise to give him time, but with the marriage date approaching, time seemed to be running out faster than ever. Vienna had been firm but understanding, arranging for a private meeting to discuss the details of their union. He had never seen her in such a vulnerable state. Beneath the armor of power she wore so effortlessly, Jackson had glimpsed the raw fear of a ruler who knew that her empire was teetering on the edge of collapse. It was late when he finally made his way to her flagship once again, the ship gliding silently through the depths of space. The corridors of the Xthar ship were quiet, as if the entire vessel was holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. When he arrived at the Queen's chambers, the door slid open without a sound. Inside, the room was dimly lit by soft, pulsating lights that gave the space a serene yet somber feel. Vienna stood by the window, looking out into the void, her silhouette stark against the backdrop of the distant stars. "Captain Renner," she greeted him, her voice soft, almost distant. "I'm here," he said, his own voice carrying a mixture of determination and uncertainty. You wanted to talk? Vienna nodded, turning to face him. Her golden eyes, usually fierce and unwavering, now held a softness that Jackson had not seen before. She looked human, more than just the powerful queen he had come to know. I wanted to know if you're sure about this, Jackson. About us, she said, her tone guarded, as if testing the waters. I know you've made your decision, but I need to hear it from you. I need to know if you understand the full weight of what this means. Jackson stood in the center of the room, searching her eyes for the truth. I understand, he said firmly. I don't know if I believe it yet, but I understand. I'm doing this for the greater good, to end the war. To give our people something worth fighting for, something other than death and destruction. Vienna stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. You're the first human to look at me like this, Jackson. The first to see me not as a conqueror, but as a leader trying to save her people. For that, I'm grateful. Jackson could feel the tension in the room, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The war had been a relentless force in his life, and now he was standing on the precipice of something that could change everything. He could feel the stirrings of something deep inside him, something that had been buried beneath his duty for so long. Are you ready? Vienna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson didn't answer immediately. His mind raced, replaying the choices he had made, the lives that had already been lost, and the people who would benefit from the peace they were about to create. But at what cost? Finally he spoke, his voice calm but resolute. I'm ready, let's do this. For the first time since they had met, Jackson saw Vienna's expression soften completely. It was a look of gratitude, of relief mixed with something else. Perhaps it was a reflection of her own uncertainty, or perhaps it was the recognition of the bond they were about to form. The marriage ceremony itself was nothing like Jackson had expected. It wasn't a grand, public affair, as he had imagined it might be, with crowds cheering and cameras capturing every moment. No, the ceremony was held in a small, quiet chamber on the Xthar flagship, surrounded by only a handful of trusted officials. There were no grand speeches, no formal rituals, just the two of them standing before each other, the weight of the galaxy on their shoulders. Vienna's voice echoed through the chamber as she spoke the vows. I vow to protect you, Jackson Renner, to unite our people in peace. To build a future where war no longer rules us, where we can live without fear of the next battle. This is my promise to you. Jackson's heart pounded in his chest as he repeated the words she spoke, each syllable feeling heavier than the last. I vow to stand beside you, Vienna, not as a conqueror but as an equal, to protect our people and to build a future of peace no matter what the cost. The moment the vows were spoken, a sense of finality filled the room. It wasn't just a union between two people. It was a union between two civilizations, each with their own history, their own pain, and their own hopes for the future. It was a moment that would forever change the course of history. The ceremony was brief, but it was powerful. The few witnesses in the room exchanged quiet glances, recognizing the enormity of the event they had just witnessed. As Jackson and Vienna stood side by side, there was no applause, no fanfare, only the knowledge that this was the beginning of something new. When the ceremony was over, Vienna turned to Jackson, her eyes filled with something that almost looked like pride. It is done, she said quietly. Now we begin the hardest part. Jackson nodded, the gravity of her words settling in. The wedding had been a symbol, but it was just the beginning. The real work, the difficult, messy work of forging peace, had only just begun. The days following the ceremony were filled with intense negotiations as both sides tried to adjust to the new reality. The human fleet was hesitant to accept the union, and many of Jackson's colleagues questioned whether he had made the right decision. There were factions within the Xthar Empire that still rejected the idea of peace, and their opposition was vocal and violent. The threat of rebellion was very real, and Jackson knew that their work was far from over. But despite the obstacles, the peace began to take hold. Slowly but surely, the ceasefire took effect, and both sides agreed to stop the bloodshed. The first joint Human-Xthar diplomatic summit was held, and Jackson found himself sitting beside Vienna as they faced the leaders of their respective worlds. It was a surreal experience. One moment he was a diplomat trying to broker peace, and the next, he was standing beside a woman he had promised to stand with for the rest of his life. The dichotomy was jarring, but it was real. In the months that followed, Jackson's life took on a new rhythm. He traveled with Vienna, working tirelessly to solidify the peace agreement and to manage the political fallout from both sides. They encountered countless challenges, from the lingering hatred between their people to the various factions that continued to resist. Yet there were moments, small victories, that made it all feel worth it. Jackson began to see Vienna not as the cold, calculating queen who had once seemed so distant, but as a partner, a leader struggling to save her people, just as he was struggling to save his own. They began to understand each other in ways that transcended politics, forging a bond that was deeper than either of them had expected. And as the war finally began to fade into history, Jackson realized something he hadn't anticipated. Peace was not just the absence of conflict. It was the creation of something new, something fragile that needed to be nurtured every day. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Jackson allowed himself to hope. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something bigger. He was fighting for a future, one that he and Vienna would build together. Months had passed since Jackson Renner and Queen Vienna had married, and the universe had begun to change in ways neither of them had anticipated. The war, which had once seemed an eternal fixture of the galaxy, was slowly grinding to a halt. The ceasefire had held longer than anyone had expected, and the first real steps toward peace were beginning to take shape. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was progress. It was something, but peace was always a fragile thing, and the road ahead was still fraught with challenges. Jackson stood on the balcony of their shared quarters aboard the flagship, staring out into the stars. The vastness of space always made him feel small, but tonight, the endless black seemed less intimidating. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was part of something bigger, something that could change the course of history. He thought about the battles he had fought, the lives lost, and the deep scars the war had left on both his people and Vienna. He remembered the first time he had met her, how cold and unapproachable she had seemed. He had never imagined that he would one day stand by her side, let alone marry her. Yet here they were. The door to their quarters opened softly, and Vienna entered, her steps quiet as always. She had always moved with a grace that spoke of her strength, of her command. But tonight she was different. Her regal posture was still there, but there was something more in her eyes, something softer, more vulnerable. "Jackson," she said, her voice warm yet tinged with something uncertain. "We need to talk." He turned to face her, sensing the weight in her tone. "What's on your mind?" Vienna walked toward him, her eyes not leaving his. "The peace talks are faltering. The council on both sides is starting to question our marriage. They see it as a symbol of weakness, of compromise, and they don't want that. Some factions on both sides are beginning to stir up trouble. We've come so far, but I fear we might be losing it all." Jackson sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've been hearing the same. The human fleet isn't happy with the way things are going. There's too much distrust, too much fear. They don't see the progress we've made, they only see the cost of peace." Vienna nodded, her golden eyes narrowing in thought. "I know. And I'm afraid that if we don't act soon, the peace will unravel. I promised you, Jackson, that we would end this war. But it's not enough to end the fighting. We need to unite our people, not just force them to cease fire. We need to show them that this alliance is real, that we are stronger together." Jackson felt the weight of her words. It wasn't just about stopping the war anymore. It was about building something new, something sustainable. Peace was more than an agreement. It had to be a living thing, a partnership that everyone believed in. "Then we need to take action," Jackson said, determination returning to his voice. "We can't just wait for the council to decide. We need to show them the value of what we're doing. We need to make them see that this union is about more than just politics. It's about survival. It's about creating a future." Vienna regarded him carefully, her eyes thoughtful. "You're right, of course. But we have to be careful. We can't force the galaxy to accept our union. We have to lead by example, make them see that we're not just talking about peace, we're living it." Jackson walked over to her, his hand reaching out instinctively to take hers. "We'll show them, Vienna. We'll show them that this is real. You and me, together." She met his gaze, and for a moment there was a flicker of something deeper, something that went beyond diplomacy or politics. It was the quiet understanding between two people who had been through hell and come out the other side together. "We'll have to start with the people," Vienna said after a long pause. "We can't just rely on the council. We need to go to the colonies, to the front lines, to the places where the fighting was fiercest. We need to show them that we stand for something more than just victory. We stand for peace. The plan was bold, but it was their only option. The next few days were a blur of preparations. Jackson and Vienna worked tirelessly to organize a tour of the human and Xthar colonies. They would travel to the planets where the war had been the deadliest, where soldiers had fought and civilians had suffered. Their message was simple: we are stronger together. They visited human colonies first, worlds that had been hit hardest by the war. They saw the aftermath of battles that had left entire cities in ruins, their once thriving cultures shattered by the ravages of war. The people were weary, broken. They had lost so much, and now they were faced with a new reality. A reality where their leader, the one who had once been their symbol of resistance, was now standing beside an alien queen. At first, the reaction was mixed. Some cheered, hopeful that peace was finally within reach. Others stared, unsure, their distrust palpable. Jackson had seen this before. The fear that peace was a lie, that they had been betrayed. Vienna stood beside him, her regal composure never faltering. She addressed the crowds with the same authority she had once used to command her warriors. I know that many of you doubt me. I know that my people have been your enemy for far too long. But what is war if not a cycle of suffering? We stand here today not as enemies but as partners, not as conquerors but as equals. I promise you the Xthar will no longer be your enemy. I stand with you, Jackson Renner stands with you, and together we will build a new future. The crowd was silent at first, then slowly, cautiously, they began to applaud. It wasn't the uproarious cheers of victory they had hoped for, but it was a start, a glimmer of belief. Their journey continued to the Xthar colonies, and there the reception was no less complicated. The Xthar people had long been proud of their warrior culture, and many felt betrayed by the idea of peace. But in every crowd, in every city, there were those who were tired. Tired of fighting, tired of loss, and tired of seeing their homes destroyed. And when Vienna spoke, her words carried the weight of both a queen and a mother. We are not abandoning our heritage, she told the Xthar people. We are strengthening it. Peace is not weakness, it is the ultimate strength. We do not need to fight to prove our worth. Together we can show the galaxy that the Xthar are more than warriors. We are survivors, we are builders, we are a people who can live in harmony, not just in conflict. Jackson watched as the crowds responded, slowly at first, then with growing fervor. The people were listening. It was happening. The unity they had dreamed of was becoming real. But even as they gained ground, the resistance remained. There were factions on both sides that wanted the war to continue, who saw peace as an affront to their power. On the human side, hawkish military leaders pushed for a stronger stance, unwilling to relinquish their control over the military. On the Xthar side, a powerful faction of generals openly rebelled against Vienna's peace efforts, calling her a traitor. One evening, after a particularly difficult summit, Jackson and Vienna sat together in their quarters, the weight of their struggles heavy between them. I never thought it would be like this, Jackson said, his voice low. I thought that once we were married, once we made the decision to end the war, it would be easy. But this isn't easy. Vienna turned to him, her expression weary but resolute. No, peace was never going to be easy, but it was always worth fighting for. Jackson met her gaze, the depth of her words sinking in. They had both made so many sacrifices, but they were not alone in this fight. They had each other, and together they would face whatever came next. We'll make it, he said, his voice firm with conviction. We've come this far, we've built something that the galaxy thought was impossible, and we'll finish what we started. Vienna smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. Together, she agreed, and for the first time since the war began, Jackson allowed himself to believe it. He wasn't just a diplomat anymore. He wasn't just a man caught between two worlds. He was part of something bigger, something that could change the future. Together, he and Vienna would rebuild the galaxy. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be more obstacles to face. But they had each other, and that was enough to keep fighting. For peace, for the future, for a new era.